So now we'll shift gears from talking about the OHR complaint process to really talking about the DC Human Rights Act. And we promise you that we'll have a few videos coming up to keep you interested, as well as more of those polling questions. So make sure you pay attention because we're going to be quizzing you in a little bit. The DC Human Rights Act of 1977, which is one of the most progressive non-discrimination laws in the nation, as I mentioned earlier, bans discrimination in housing, which we're talking about today, employment, public accommodations, and educational institutions. Really, the reason we consider the DC Human Rights Act to be one of the most progressive non-discrimination laws in the nation is because it provides protections based on 18 protected groups, compared to only 7 in the Federal Fair Housing Act. The ones included under the Fair Housing Act are race, color, sex, national origin, religion, age, and disability. Those not included under federal law, but protected under the DC Human Rights Act, are personal appearance, marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, familial status, family responsibilities, matriculation, which is really status as a student, political affiliation, source of income, and this is often, such as the use of housing vouchers is often considered a source of income, status as a victim of an intrafamily offense, and place of residence or business. We're now going to look at the protected group status as a victim of an intrafamily offense a little more closely. Because status as a victim of an intrafamily offense is protected in DC, it is now prohibited to refuse to make a reasonable accommodation in restoring or improving security and or safety measures for a victim of domestic violence. It's prohibited to prevent a person from terminating a lease early or with a penalty if they are a victim of such an offense. And it's also prohibited to bar or limit the right of a victim to call the police for emergency assistance or to impose a penalty for calling for emergency assistance. Status as a victim was added just a few years ago and is really an important addition to protecting victims of domestic violence here in DC. The bottom line here is that in the area of fair housing, DC law is much more comprehensive than federal law with our 18 protected groups. This means that whether you're a tenant or a homeowner, whether you're applying for a loan or applying to rent an apartment, you are legally protected from discrimination under 18 different characteristics. So we promised you videos, and here comes the first one. We're going to watch a video showing an example of a discriminatory incident based on national origin.
Good afternoon, Parkside Apartments. Mr. Belmont speaking. I'm my assistant.
Hi, yes, Mr. Belmont.
Is Mr. Gomez from apartment 111?
Yes it is.
Alright, look, I have an issue with you people keep calling here asking for repairs to your apartment. We have explained to you that we don't do business like that. What's the problem now?
Well, the problem is that I reported a broken sink and garbage disposal over 5 weeks ago and nothing's been done about it. And coincidentally, my neighbor who reported the same issue got hers fixed right away. And I'm kind of wondering why there's some differential treatment here for what seems to be like individuals who aren't Hispanic who are getting repairs fixed immediately.
Look, you'll get your things fixed when we can do it. Don't call us again, or we'll be forced to evict you.
You can't do that.
Oh, we can't? Watch me. Keep causing problems to see what will happen.
Okay, look, I don't want to cause any more problems. I just want to get my sink fixed. Could you please just let me know when you'll be able to come up and do it?
When we get to it.
Oh!
Hey, Mr. Belmont, how you doing?
Hey, how you doing, Miss Vicky?
All right, my garbage disposal broke this morning. You think you can come by and fix it?
Sure, no problem. You can go get my tools and we can get on it right away.
Great, thank you so much.
So I'm sure the dramatic music in the background showed how serious a matter this is. But it actually is something that really affects the lives of many individuals and is more common perhaps than you'd think. So given that example of discrimination based on national origin, we're going to move on to another poll, and it's about the protected groups. Like I said, you just saw one based on national origin, and we've talked about how there are 18 protected groups in D.C. So our question to you, as a little pop quiz, is which of the protected groups below is not covered under the D.C. Human Rights Act? The four options are personal appearance, status as a veteran, race, or familial status. So feel free to answer now, and we'll see how you all do. The responses are still coming in. Just a few more seconds, and we'll show you the results here. So it looks like the majority of you do remember that status as a veteran is not covered under the D.C. Human Rights Act or federal law. It is covered in some jurisdictions. Personal appearance seemed to be the one that caught the second number of responses. And I think D.C. is actually pretty unique in including personal appearance amongst its protected categories. But it's one that we do see in front of the office a decent amount, both in housing and employment. So, again, the correct answer is status as a veteran that is not covered under D.C. law. So now I'm going to pass this webinar over to my colleague, Akita Smith-Evans, who I can't say enough about. She, again, is our lead fair housing investigator here, an expert on this topic, and she will be going in more depth into the Federal Fair Housing Act that we talked a little bit about earlier.
Thank you, Elliot. I appreciate that nice introduction. Now we're going to get more deeply into the Fair Housing Act, as Elliot has mentioned. The purpose and intent of the Fair Housing Act was to promote equal housing for not just some, but for all. When we think about the Fair Housing Act, it's very important to remember its context. When the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1960, segregation was rampant. Brown versus Board of Education had only passed a few years earlier. And in many states, they still enforced the Jim Crow laws to maintain segregation. When passed, the Federal Fair Housing Act originally only covered race, color, national origin, and religion. The Fair Housing Act was later amended to add sex as a protected group, and again amended to add disability and familial status as a protected group. The Fair Housing Act is very broad. It prohibits discrimination in virtually all areas of housing, from refusing to rent, financing, denying or limiting services, or imposing different terms and conditions based on one's protected category, such as your race, your national origin, or your sex. Now what we're going to do is show you another video. This video pertains to refusal to rent, in this case based on religion. Let's have a look.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
I saw your advertisement across the street for a condo for sale.
Yes, we definitely have a condo for sale. Let me get you to fill out this guest card.
Sure.
It's a beautiful unit. Perhaps you can take a look at it today and give the board president a call.
You are.
Thank you. How do you pronounce your name?
Afia Muhammad.
Is that a Muslim name?
Oh, yes, it is. Why do you ask?
Well, to be quite honest, we don't have any Muslims in this condo, and there are no mosques in this area. Actually, I forgot. There was a contract put on this condo last week. The board was impressed with the couple, and most likely their application will be approved. Are you sure you want to apply?
Well, if you think I have a good chance of getting in.
I think you should wait till next week. Give us a call back to see if the contract was approved. Because quite honestly, Ms. Ahmed, I don't want you to...
Muhammad.
I'm sorry. Ms. Muhammad, I don't want you to waste your time. If you want to submit your application, here's our checklist. Just be sure to submit your U.S. passport and your voter registration card.
Okay.
So now, as you all can see from this video, even though the representative was being very nice and polite, She gave those subtle hints of discrimination, and she made an assumption based on this complainant's or this potential applicant's last name and assuming that she would be more comfortable somewhere else. And even though sometimes representatives may try to look in your best interest, it's not always in your best interest. They are intending to discriminate even more. And we'll see more of that later on in the presentation. One type of housing discrimination is blockbusting. And blockbusting is what happens when a real estate agent persuades an owner to rent or to sell their property because a particular group of people are moving into the neighborhood. For example, if the neighborhood is predominantly white and the real estate agent convinces the owner to sell their home at a reduced price because a protected group, such as Hispanics, are starting to integrate the neighborhood, this would be considered blockbusting and is illegal. The real estate agent may use stereotypes about Hispanics to convince the owner that the diminishing value of their property is inevitable. Another example of housing discrimination is called steering. While steering is very common, it may be done in a subtle way to make the buyer feel as though the agent is looking out for the best interest of the buyer when the intent is to discriminate. For example, an agent tells a couple with a child that the homes across town would suit them better because they have lots of parks, playgrounds, and plenty of places for children to play. However, the couple is only interested in homes in a certain part of the town, but the agent insists that another area of the neighborhood is better without even bothering to show the couple the houses that they have requested. It might not appear on its surface that it's discrimination, but this could be a form of discrimination. This couple with children should be able to live anywhere they choose. It should be based on their qualifications and not on their protected categories. Here's a quick example of a video of steering.
Hello, my name is Veronica, and I'm here because I saw your advertisement for the 2-bedroom apartments.
Well, welcome. My name is Tara, and I'm actually the leasing manager. We have a few 2-bedroom apartments available. Do you have any children?
I do. I have a 7-year-old son.
Okay. Well, what I'll do is I'll actually show you the unit we have coming available on the first floor.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. I believe you said you had a few coming open. Could I see all of them?
We do. However, we only rent units on the first floor to families with children.
And why is that?
Because children tend to make a lot of noise and they disturb people on the floors below them.
Okay, well, that will not be a problem. My child is very well behaved.
I'm sure she or he is, but that's just our policy.
Okay, well, I have a son again, and could you tell me a little bit about the amenities here?
Excuse me for a second. We actually, each unit comes standard with wall-to-wall carpeting. We have newly refurnished kitchens, and there's a laundry facility in the basement.
Okay, a pool. I believe I saw an advertisement about pool.
We do have a pool, but that wouldn't apply to you. At this point, we've restricted children from using our pool because they splash a lot and make a lot of noise and disturb the other residents.
Wow, okay. Well, thank you for your time, but I do not think this is going to be the right place for me and my family.
I totally agree, but thank you, and good luck with your search.
Thanks.
Now, as you can see from this video, this housing presenter was very rude, and she even rolled her eyes and said, you know, I think somewhere else is better for you. Again, an applicant has the right to live wherever they want. They can live on the first floor, second floor, and this also goes to the terms and conditions. The children should not be limited from going to the pool or limited to using the services of that property. So this is, again, another form of discrimination based on familiar status. When we think about housing discrimination, it's also important for us to think about the more subtle ways people learn about housing availability. The Act prohibits the making, printing, and publishing or cause to be published any notice, statement that indicates a preference or a limitation. This also applies to written materials, oral notices, or statements. It includes applications, brochures, deeds, signs, banners, posters, and billboards. Expressing to anyone a preference or limitation on a purchase is prohibited. For example, a newspaper advertisement states, beautiful 3-bedroom home for rent, no children allowed. This statement would be a violation of the Act. So at this point, we're going to have another poll for you all to do, and this is based on what protected group does the Office of Human Rights receive the highest number of complaints in the area of housing. So if you all can just take a quick moment to put what you think is the most highly complained about protected group. and then we'll show you the results from that. Okay, so we give a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close out the poll here. Aha, so most of you all picked race as one of the highly complained about protected categories. And I would have to say that in most instances you would be correct, but for the D.C. Office of Human Rights, our leading category is disability, and race comes in second. At one point, race was first, but now with the accessibility issues, disability has been our leading complaint base. Thank you for taking that poll. The Fair Housing Act doesn't just tell us what housing providers can't do, it also tells us what housing providers must do, like provide reasonable accommodations or reasonable modifications for persons with disabilities. Reasonable accommodations in housing applies to persons identified as having a disability or associated with someone who has a disability. And for instance, the association could be that you don't have the disability, but your spouse or your child or a friend who comes over or a parent who comes may have a disability. Reasonable accommodations are given to residents or applicants seeking housing to allow them an opportunity to fully enjoy the premises just as anyone else who does not have a disability. A reasonable accommodation is a change in the rules and procedures, but it should not fundamentally change how a housing provider operates. For example, the tenant requests a handicapped parking space because they have problems walking a far distance due to their disability. This is a reasonable request for the tenant to make to the landlord. However, if the tenant asks the landlord to bring him or her the daily newspaper because they're unable to walk a far distance, this would change the fundamental operation of the housing provider, unless this is some type of service that the housing provider provides to all tenants. Otherwise, this would not be considered a reasonable accommodation to have your paper delivered to your door. The tenant usually pays for an accommodation requiring modifications or structure of their home, such as the installation of a wheelchair ramp, unless the housing provider is federally funded, in which case the housing provider may pay for all of the modifications. It is the tenant's responsibility to make a reasonable accommodation request to the housing provider, either verbally or in writing. It's not for the housing provider to assume or guess or think that you require a reasonable accommodation. Even when they see a person in a wheelchair, they shouldn't automatically assume that this person will need some type of accommodation. At this point, we're going to talk about the modifications and making the request and what's needed. When the tenant is making a request, they should at least present some type of medical documentation. However, the landlord is not allowed to get into the nature and the details of your disability, only that you provide something from either a therapist or a medical assistant showing that you do have a certifiable disability. You can make a reasonable accommodation request, but they cannot inquire into the nature of your disability. In the accessibility of housing, apartments or homes built after March 13, 1991, they're required to at least have 7 technical accessible features. For one, accessible entrance on an accessible route, accessible common and public areas, usable doors, accessible route within the unit, accessible light switches, electrical outlets, and environmental controls such as your air condition switch or your heat switch, reinforced walls in the bathrooms, and usable kitchens and bathrooms. Here's a list of the type of properties that are covered under the Federal Fair Housing Act and the Human Rights Act. As you can see from the list, there are quite a bit of properties that are covered: apartments, single-family homes, condominiums, cooperatives. As you can also see, even vacant land zone for residential housing is covered. Now let's talk about the properties that are not covered under the Federal Fair Housing Act. The following 4 types of properties are not subjected to the rules of the Federal Fair Housing Act or the D.C. Human Rights Act. If someone was to bring a claim against these type of properties, it will more than likely be dismissed for lack of jurisdiction. So let's start with small property owners. Small property owners considered exempt if they do not have an interest in more than 3 single-family homes, they do not use the service of a broker or sales agent, and the building has 4 or fewer units and the owner resides in one of those units. So if you have an apartment building with a 4-unit building and the landlord lives there, more than likely that property is exempt from housing. However, as we talked about earlier, that property is not exempt from discriminatory advertising. So if they made a discriminatory advertisement, you found the ad in the newspaper and you saw it says no children, or it says, you know, no blacks, things of that nature, that landlord would lose out on their exemption by making that discriminatory advertisement. Religious organizations. Religious organizations can give preference to members of their own religion or clubs in housing that they operate on a non-commercial basis. Groups and clubs, however, cannot restrict membership on the basis of race, color, or national origin. We're going to talk a little bit about senior housing. Senior housing is also considered exempt from the familiar status protection if, 1, all residents in the housing are 62 years of age or older, or at least 80% of the units are occupied by at least one person that is 55 years of age or older. Again, this only exempts people from filing familiar status protection. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the roommate situations. There is a caveat in the Fair Housing Act and in the D.C. Human Rights Act in which a person can have a preference or limitation in terms of roommate status. So, for instance, although a small property owner could be exempt, in this situation, if you have a shared living space and it's a female wanting another female, there is an exception to the rule for that. And it only applies to shared living situations such as sharing the kitchen and the bathroom. Okay, and so now this brings me to, I'm going to conclude by sharing some new information about the Fair Housing Act that was released from the Department of Housing and Urban Development only about a year ago. It's the HUD LGBT Rule. The HUD LGBT Rule became effective March 21st, 2012. This rule provides equal access to housing and HUD programs regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. If the person is applying for a program that is federally funded, the agent should not inquire to the sexual orientation or the gender identity of a person to determine if they are eligible for a program. So that's pretty exciting. That's something new that HUD has opened up. And hopefully with this new rule, this will also get HUD to add a new protected category maybe in the future. The bottom line is, the rule of thumb is that everyone should be treated the same based on their qualifications regardless of their protected class. That's the only thing that matters. It shouldn't matter about your race, your sex, your national origin, but that you're just as qualified as the next person. Everyone should have equal enjoyment to equal and safe, decent housing. Now, I would like for you all to take one more poll. We're going to collect this information, but I would like to let you know that this information is collected for a statistic purpose, is not going to be used with anyone. Based on the fair housing information provided today, please select one or more of the following as it pertains to housing discrimination. One is, I have been a victim, I know a victim, I have not been a victim, or I do not know a victim of housing discrimination. So we'll take a few minutes to answer this last poll. Is it close? Okay. We'll take a look at the results. Wow. So we have at least 56% who know of a victim. And in the second category, some who said they have not been a victim. And so as we spoke about today, housing discrimination is very rampant. Some folks do not bring it to our attention. And so those of you out there who know of someone can lead them to our office and let them know that we have a process in which we will investigate complaints of discrimination. Because, again, everyone has the free range to live wherever they want, however they want, as long as they qualify, and it shouldn't be based on their protected category. Thank you so much for this.